welcome to the StephUp podcast. I am your host, Stephanie and Webb, and my guest today is Leticia R. Renee Francis, known as the Survival Mode Disruptor. She's a trauma recovery mentor, speaker, and author who helps high achieving women stop pretending they're okay and start truly healing. Her own story is one of turning deep pain into purpose, and now she guides others through breaking free from burnout, people pleasing, perfectionism, and the lingering impacts of trauma. She's also the author of Survival Mode Exit Plan and host of the Survival Mode Disrupted podcast. Welcome, Leticia. I'm so excited to talk with you.
Hi, Stephanie. I'm super excited to be here. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to show up on your platform.
Thank you. I was like, am I gonna get any of that wording mixed up? Sometimes when I'm reading, I'm like, ah, blah, blah, blah. You know how it goes.
Yes, which is why people introduce themselves.
I met you through the DWC magazine because we're both contributing writers, and
Yes.
you wrote this one piece a few weeks ago about how a lot of us are in survival mode. And so when you see people thriving, you wonder, well, I can't do that. Like, how am I supposed to get there? Because we're just surviving day to day. And I was like, this is so what I can relate to. And then I added you as a Facebook friend.
Yeah, I love DWC. What a great publication, right?
Yes. And the owners, Camille and Mike, are amazing. Lovely people. So it's
Yes.
great. Yay. And now I've made you as a friend. So I'm really excited. Um, so yeah, you have quite a story. Can you share a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. So I grew up on a very small island, 21 square miles, Bermuda. And probably a very normal childhood initially, until my parents divorced. And both of my parents remarried.
Hmm.
Both of my parents' spouses wanted nothing to do with me. And there was a point in time when I was about 7, I asked my daddy, why did you divorce my mom? And he told me, because were born. So his narrative was that his marriage ended because my mom paid a little bit too much attention to me. What actually happened, which I learned in my 30s, was that he cheated and my mom kicked him to the curb. But that story, along with the difficulties that I experienced in my household, created this dynamic for me that I really just wanted someone to see me and accept me. Shortly after that conversation with my father, I was then molested. And while I knew maybe not so much what happened was wrong, I knew that I shouldn't have been with that person. Um, I liked the attention and I didn't tell anybody. I liked the attention and it kept happening. As I got older, because I had been exposed to sexual experiences so young, by the time I was 11 and 12, I was interacting with much older men. I lost my virginity to rape at 12. And I was very promiscuous at that point. And I was having sex with men in their 20s, in their 30s. And it really was me still seeking attention. I met a man that was more than twice my age at the age of 14 who groomed me. He um, invited me to be his girlfriend. And at that time, I was really dealing with a lot of contention in both homes. My father's wife basically said, I don't want to raise your child. And I spent less and less time there. And my mother's husband basically told me to go kill myself. Um, So this man entering my life created this safety net for me. It was an escape. I am a huge Disney fan, and I would say he was my knight in shining armor, my Prince Charming. And because I wasn't aware of what grooming looked like, I wasn't aware of what love bombing looked like. I wasn't aware that I was in a very, very toxic situation. The first time he put his hands on me, I was 15 years old. He tried to choke me. Um, when he saw me talking to a boy from my school, he said he was jealous. He called me a whore and choked me out. And I believe the only reason why I survived that was because someone in his household pulled him off of me. I knew then that like a man should not put his hands on you. I packed up everything that I owned at his house in a trash bag and I walked to my uncle's house and left. But now I don't have an escape. I'm left having to go home after school instead of going to his house, or I'm left trying to figure out what else to do on weekends because I didn't have his home to go to. And my relationships with my parents got inherently worse because I was angry. I was angry of having to be in a situation where they clearly didn't want me. They were both present, but I always classify the relationships as emotional neglect because they didn't protect me. They didn't check for me. They allowed people to come into our relationship and our dynamic and dismiss me. So I really didn't have much respect for them because I was being neglected. And my mom kicked me out when I was 16. I went to live with my father for about 2 weeks, and then he kicked me out, and I had to go back to my mom. Um, and I felt like nobody really cared enough for me.
And
I
this was
then got
still 15 years old?
I was about 16,
Wow.
getting into 17. I was kicked out permanently from my mom's home and I was about 17 years old. Like she literally got a restraining order against me. I got a letter in the mail telling me that I was no longer allowed on her property. And if I came on her property, she had the right to call the police and have me removed. And at that point, I entered back into the relationship with this man because he was the only person that would house me. My family, my immediate family, to them, I was just this wayward teenager. So they didn't help, and I was left having to fend for myself. So I moved back in with him, and he made it known very early on that I owed him. My mom didn't love me, my dad didn't love me, nobody else cared enough for me to house me, and I owed him. I married him when I was 19, and when I got married, uh, the ownership element of our relationship became very apparent. There were things that I wanted to do in my life that he was like, "No, you're a wife now. You should have done that before you married me." Um, there was a lot of control. There was a lot of abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, that I endured for a very long time. I, over time, decided that I couldn't stay in that relationship, but I had never lived alone. I had never paid a bill. I had never had to be responsible for myself. So I stayed out of fear that I couldn't make it on my own. What was interesting was at that time I was working in law enforcement and I could have easily reported what was going on in my household. But as I said at the beginning, I grew up on a very small island in Bermuda. Your business spreads faster than the flu. So I didn't want the people that I worked alongside or to have access to my private life. So I kept quiet and I stayed until one day I lost my phone. I thought I had perhaps left it at home. I rode a moped. I might have dropped out of my pocket on the road and I all day was just like, well, maybe it's him, maybe it's her. I got home and I used to work 24-hour shifts, but I got home and I called my phone and my husband answered. And when he answered, my heart dropped because of how toxic that situation was. I began seeking attention, and I was seeking attention from other men. I never had any sexual relations with them, but they would come to my job on this 24-hour shifts and bring me alcohol or food or just keep me company. And I knew if he had the phone, he would probably have access to the taxes. So when he answered, he said, I'll deal with you when I get home. And I was terrified. At that time, we were living with someone else because our home had been destroyed by a hurricane. And as I sat in wait for him, my house phone rang, the landline rang. It was one of my friends. Now, keep in mind, I had basically been with this guy since I was 14. My friends didn't know the intricate workings of our relationship. And because I had been in a relationship for so long, at this point, it was like six going on 7 years, my friends used to come to me for advice. This day, my friend, she called and she says, Oh, I tried to call your cell phone. Your husband answered. He sounded very angry. But this is my problem. And she proceeded to tell me how she was being abused by her heroin addict boyfriend and she needed some advice. To offer her some advice, I picked up a book by Ian Levenzant called Until Today, which is a daily devotional. And I randomly opened the book and randomly read her a passage. The passage that I read that night talked about our interpersonal relationships and how people are in our lives for three reasons: a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And oftentimes, our interpersonal relationships don't work out because we're trying to keep people in our lives a lot longer than they need to be there. And I sat there like my whole body, like just full of chills because it was this reconciliation. The reason why this man and my relationship isn't working for me is because his time is up in my life. I had previously started planning on how I can escape because one of the things that I wanted to do is go off to college, and he basically told me that I couldn't do that. So I had started applying for schools, and I was going to tell him that I got accepted at one and I would go to the other and just basically disappear.
Wow.
So I like it really anchored my desire to leave that relationship. It was interesting that it happened that night because he later came home a couple of hours later, completely drunk. And he also had seen in my phone in the conversations how I was telling people that I really want to leave and leave the island. So he basically told me the only way that I was going to leave was in a body bag. Now, if anyone has experienced abuse long term, you kind of got a sense of how bad things are about to be. And something in the very core of me told me this is going to be horrible. And I ran to the landline and I called my mom and I was like, you need to come get me right now. As I did that, I realized that my husband had a knife in his hand. He then proceeded to barricade us into the bedroom that we were staying in. And whenever I talk about this, I always say it's like a Matrix meme, you know, how like Neo was like dodging bullets. I felt like that was what my experience was. It was an outer body experience. I watched myself fight, but I was full of adrenaline. I wasn't aware of what was happening in that moment. I never recognized that he had stabbed me. But because we were staying with someone, the chaos of it all, the person that we were living with eventually broke into the room. As once the door opened, I ran into the living room and fell down. My husband followed behind me. Sorry, I just need some water,
That's
if that's
okay.
okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That's like one of those experiences of, if something happens to your house and then you're like, "Oh, we have to stay with somebody." And you're like, "This is terrible." But you never know the reason that could be. And you being in somebody else's home saved your life.
It absolutely saved my life.
Wow.
So I fell onto the couch. I ran into the living room, fell on the couch. My husband followed behind me, straddled me, and continued to try to to stab me. And again, it was like that moment of dodging the bullets. The person we were staying with was my husband's friend, and there was a lot of other things going on in the house. So he basically said, "Listen, you gotta go because I don't want the police coming." Her.
Mm.
I was kicked out of the house with no shoes on, no bra on, just a t-shirt and my underpants, and the hope that my mother actually listened. It was raining. The yard that was outside the house didn't have much grass. It was just like a muddy mess. And I was just standing there, like, I don't even know what to do in this moment. At this point, it was like probably 1 o'clock in the morning. Um, I didn't know what to do. But as I was standing there, I felt this warmness dripping down my body, and I couldn't recognize what that was. I didn't look, but I just felt it. And as I'm feeling it and processing it, my mom pulls up. She immediately saw the blood. That was what I was feeling. And she started screaming, "Oh my God, you're bleeding, you're bleeding, you're bleeding." Like, what happened? And I was like, "He stabbed me. He must have stabbed me." So as my mom pulled up, he sees the headlights of the car coming up the driveway. He proceeded to start throwing all of my belongings, which I actually had run into the bedroom to start packing. He started throwing all of my belongings outside into the muddy yard. And I'm taking the stuff off the ground and trying to put it in the car. Um, he threw out a bag that was full of about $20,000 worth of Louis Vuitton bags.
Whoa.
He used to gift me with Louis Vuitton bags after a major fight to apologize. Um, so those bags I felt like I earned. But once I realized he threw them out, I knew that that was a mistake because he had always held it over my head. Like, if you leave, you have to leave those here. And so I immediately picked those up and try to stuff it under everything in the trunk. But he came out. He came out the house once he realized that he had thrown his Louis Vuitton bags out. And he started unpacking the trunk, trying to get the bags. And again, I said I felt like I earned those. I started fighting with him to get the bags out of the car. And my mama was like, "Are you crazy? Just get in the car. Just get in the car." He still had the knife. He still had my blood all over his shirt. And I think my mother's fear in her voice was what made me realize like how much danger I was actually in. So I got in the car and my mom was like, "We're gonna go to the hospital." And I was like, "Oh, hell no. We're not going to the hospital." So I convinced her to take me to her house because I knew if I went to the hospital, the police would be called immediately, and I did not want that. So we got to her house. We managed to stop the bleeding. Most of the cuts were fairly superficial. I had one or two fairly deep cuts, but we were able to stop the bleeding. I over the years had been going to my doctor and noting my abuse just in case anything happened to me, there would be a history. So I told my mom, "I'll just go to the doctor in the morning," which I did. So I'm there trying to process what I had considered the absolute worst day of my life. And my mom came back in the kitchen and she said, "Well, I don't know where you're gonna go, but you can't stay here."
Wow.
And I then called around to see where else I can go. I was instructed to go to a police station close to the house, and I would be escorted to a safe. a safe location without any questions asked. And so that's what I did. And I was left to kind of piece the pieces back together, basically in a homeless shelter, where I stayed for about 2 months until I had enough money to get my own apartment.
Were you still going
I
to work at this time?
Yes, I
Oh my
only miss
God.
1 day of work. And the only reason why I miss 1 day of work is because I had still had on my uniform. Um, he sliced my sweater and
Wow.
I needed it to get it replaced.
Mm.
And that is the only reason why I miss work because I didn't have a proper uniform. But I was going to work and just continued on with life. I really thought that, and at this point I'm about 21. So I really thought naively that life would just magically fall back into place once I left. He stalked me for about 2 years. He would show up at my job randomly. I used to, I worked in law enforcement, but I also worked at a convenience store. He would literally come and park outside the convenience store, and just be there to intimidate me. So I laughed, but I was still being abuse in a sense, right? Like post-separation abuse is like something that we don't talk about often, but oftentimes what happens after you leave can be worse mentally than when you're in there. Like he found out where I lived. He used to come and knock on my door 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning until I would call the police. I got restraining orders. He would then call from different numbers where I'll have to literally turn my phone off or unplug the phone because he would call for hours and hours and hours at a time.
That's important to because people will just say, there's a lot of just sayings, right?
Mhm.
Just leave, just get a restraining order. But they find ways to I mean I hear these stories and you just like, yeah, it doesn't stop that.
It does not. It
And
does not
there's
stop
not
anyone's behavior. And they don't have fear of it because oftentimes they know they probably could get away with it because, okay, well, I'll have to call the police and then I'll have to wait for the police. And it will depend on what else is going on, how important my issue is. Like there's been times I called the police and it took them 45 minutes to an hour to show up, So
and
they get away with it.
the laws that are in place don't they're not exactly for all these different situations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I found peace at the bottom of a bottle for many years. I just drank away my pain. No way to process it. Although I had been in therapy for many years, I didn't think my therapy actually helped in any way. So I just drank my pain away and I made a decision that I was going to finally go off to school. So I moved to Atlanta. I ended up getting a full scholarship to study actuarial science because Bermuda is an insurance mecca. And I actually thought life would get so much better. Um, and then I met this guy who I later found out um, was a cocaine addict. Our relationship advanced very quickly. Within 6 weeks, I was living with him. I lived with him for many years. And that relationship ended as a result of finding out that he was married. Uh,
He
so,
had different residences?
yeah, he had moved to Atlanta from Florida, obviously separated. And yeah, I had gone home one summer. Um, and I came back surprising him, and I was met by his wife at the door.
Oh, wow.
I pieced my life back together once again after that. I experienced emotional and financial abuse in that relationship. And I then moved back to Bermuda. I got a amazing job. I used to be a catastrophe modeler in commercial insurance. And I focused on my career and I also focused on my healing. Around that time, Iyanla Van Zandt and I have read every single one of her books. She had released a book called Peace from Broken Pieces. And that resonated with me so much that I really was just focused on me. But then I met this guy, and off the first year of our relationship was bliss. It was like Hallmark type bliss. And then one of his family members died, and he relapsed from crack cocaine. His relapse happened very quickly and it was very intense. And I knew what was happening almost immediately because I had just left a relationship with an active addict. Um, but I was still being manipulated by him. One day he called me. He was a chef at a very high-end grocery store slash restaurant group. Um, and he asked me to pick up a bag for him. And I didn't think anything of it. I went to pick up the bag. I was surrounded by security when I got there. And I learned that day that apparently he had been stealing very expensive meats from his job. So much so that they had installed cameras in the freezer. And they knew he was taking it. They just didn't know how. So I show up, I go get this bag, and hey, you know. I didn't think anything would happen. He lost his job that day. He got arrested that day. And cool. They got the person. But a couple of weeks later, I was working and the phone rang. It was the receptionist, and she was like, "Hi, Leticia, the police are here for you." And I was like, "For me? For what?" So I said, something in me was like, I'm in trouble. So I was like, can you tell them to meet me downstairs? Instead of me going to the reception area, I was like, let me just go downstairs just in case. And I got downstairs. They exited the elevator and arrested me on spot. So I was taken to the police station. I was given my one call and I called my mom. I was like, look, you got to find me a lawyer. I'm getting in trouble for what so and so did, and this is ridiculous, right? Like, I didn't even know this is what was going on. Instead of her calling a lawyer, she came to the police station and I was sat behind glass talking to her. She asked me a single question. She asked me, why do you love everyone else more than you love yourself? And I tell everybody that was like a Mike Tyson body blow. She winded me. I didn't have an answer, but I had to go back in my cell and process that. And what I recognized, I wasn't, sorry, I wasn't responsible for being like my actions directly were not the reason why I was in that jail cell. However, my decisions were. And if I didn't learn how to make better decisions, jail would have been my reality. I spent 8 hours in jail. I was never charged with a crime. I spent more time in jail than he did. And when
No.
I left, yes. When I left, I immediately sought the help of a coach and I started going to coaching. I picked somebody who was like brutal, like slap you in the face with the truth, brutal, because I needed that. I didn't need someone to pacify me. I didn't need someone to coddle me. I needed someone to shake me. And that's exactly what she did. I remember one day I was like, listen, I'm a victim. I've been victimized my whole life. And she says, yeah, and that's the reason why you're stuck, because you just celebrate being a victim. And when she said it, I looked at her like, lady, are you crazy? But then she went on to explain that by being a victim, by holding on to that narrative so tightly, I was giving away my power. I was giving away my ability to take control over my life. And that changed everything for me. I started learning how to love myself. I started learning how to accept myself because acceptance wasn't something that I ever did. I in addition to all of the chaos that I had experienced, I had always been labeled as being too much or too opinionated or too this and too that. So to be able to get to a point where I can accept my flaws, I can accept my negative experiences and not let that define me, changed my life. And I made a decision shortly after working with that coach to just leave Bermuda. I moved to England. I soared in my career.
And what age was that when you left?
27, 28.
Okay.
Um, no, actually, it was right before I turned 30. Right after I turned 30 is when it happened. Um, and I focused in on my career. But then I had two children back to back, and in England we have, a long maternity leave. So over a period of 3 years, I was out of work for two, and I was left kind of soul searching. Yeah, I had reached the pinnacle of my career working in commercial insurance. If those who don't know, Lloyd's of London is the birthplace of insurance. I was working for a top five Lloyd's of London syndicate. I was running a multinational team. I was the third in command in my entire department. I I ticked all the boxes, but I wasn't happy. I wasn't fulfilled. And on my maternity leave, I was always still giving people advice. People were coming to me to offload all of the difficulties, and I would sit and I would listen. And someone said shortly after I gave birth to my second child, you should find a way to make money out of this. And it was like this aha moment. This is exactly what I've been searching for all this time. So I started um, a coaching training program. I started really anchoring into understanding how I could be as impactful to other people as that coach was to me. And I walked away from my 9 to 5 and I just anchored in to being impactful in this world. And that's what I do now, you know. I talk a lot about the residual impacts of trauma because I feel like had I known that I was operating from that earlier, a lot of what I went through post-stabbing would have been eliminated. And I just want people to understand that, yes, you have been traumatized, but you are not your trauma. And if you can get to a place where you understand how your trauma is showing up in your life, that is freedom for you to move forward. So that's my story in a
Mm.
quick little nutshell.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Hello, my lovelies. It's Steph here for a quick break. If you're enjoying the Stuff Up podcast and you want to support the show, you can buy me a coffee. Just check the link in the show notes or the description, or if you're watching on YouTube, you can scan the QR code that's literally on your screen right now. Thank you so much. Sending love to you all, and back to the show. When you're telling me all this, I'm somebody because I know people have used trauma to um, advance their career and be like they're like I am going to make it. It makes they start pushing forward, and I'm the opposite. I would just like give up. I would just get depressed, and I was so when people started when you're sharing this, you're like I did this and I did this and I did this. I was like, wow. Because there and then there's the opposite of people who just let it crush them. And I find that very interesting that how did you was it the adrenaline and just like what is it that fueled you in your career with all the nervous system stress that you were going under? Like I would just be curled up in bed depressed, like I don't know.
Okay, so that's very interesting. It's a very interesting story. And one of the things that I've learned about myself is that I thrived off of negative motivation, right?
Okay.
I started growing dreadlocks when I was like 18 years old. And I remember my granny telling me, no one will ever hire you with those things in your head. But I held on to that. Not only did they hire me, I was the best employee they ever had. And that was what motivated me for a very long time. A lot of what I accomplished in life was a middle finger to someone else's narrative of me. When I left Bermuda, someone told me that my personality would to be too much in an English environment. And while I did struggle in some companies when I first moved out here, what I did at my last role is rewrote how the entire department operated. I was a one-woman team running, managing close to 30 people across multiple continents. So to me, that was like the biggest middle finger to someone when I first left Bermuda, telling me that I would never make it. So yeah, a lot of what I accomplished was due to negative motivation, just trying to prove someone wrong because I felt like most of my life that's what I've had to do.
Okay, that's very fascinating. Yeah. And so I, because I'm more of a positive motivation person, or I'm
Mhm.
definitely not just more, I am. I don't do well under negative. And so, but when they talk about that, is it just somebody who's gone through that likes the negative motivation, or is it just there's two different people who really thrive under each? Do you know what I'm trying to
I
say?
think it was definitely a trauma response.
So people who say that they like that, do you think that
I
there's like
think
an
so.
underlying?
I think the core of it is experiencing a lot of criticism from a young age. Um, it's either you give in to the criticism or you fight against it, right? So
Mhm.
I that's what I think the core of it is that traumatic experiences very young that have you second guessing your self-worth. Um, and some people fall victim to it and some people thrive under it. And I'm thankful that I was able to thrive. But it was something that I had to rewrite as well because I also found myself being in a place that if negative motivation wasn't present, I found it very hard to achieve the things that I wanted to achieve because I didn't have to prove myself wrong or prove somebody else wrong.
When you did get, like, let's say you had a manager who was trying to give you like positive, did you find that challenging then? Like you like the negative
I,
reinforcement, or do you know?
it probably took me more time to accept it than the negative stuff. Like I had my own opinion of myself, but I didn't always believe that someone else's positive opinion was coming from a good intention.
Mm, right. That makes sense. Yeah. Wow. You are so good at sharing this. Like you've been sharing your story and you're just like leaning in because you're just like first of all, you share it very well. But it's such a powerful story. And to hear how you've overcome and all of these different things, um, and your mom saying that, like, like, what? But that was the thing that really got you starting to think about what is going on. Why don't I love myself? And yeah. When people start when you're living in survival mode, you don't feel safe. Like at all? Did you ever feel safe with anybody, or were you just constantly just in
I was in a
survival?
constant state of fight and flight, highly defensive. Um, in between moving back to Bermuda and entering into the relationship with the crack addict, I had met somebody that was very calm. It was very healthy, and I didn't know how to deal with that. Like, what is this? Where's the chaos? And so a lot of my healing was having to learn to accept peace, having to learn how to not do, because that had become such a norm for me. When you're in survival mode, like you really are fighting and flighting in life. Like everything becomes a threat to you, and that level of threat would depend on the level of trauma you've experienced. My trauma was severe and
Mm.
it was compounded and long term. So it was very hard for me to trust people's intentions, to lower my guard. That also made me very susceptible to narcissistic people and love bombing. And that's why my relationships move so quickly, right? Like 6 weeks, I'm living with somebody. I don't even know your middle name.
When, how can someone begin to start feeling safe enough to step out of survival mode? Like, where, because it's such a scary thing, like you were saying, when there's somebody who's, and we've seen these movies too, where they keep going back to the narcissist or to the chaos, and the safe person, it doesn't feel right for them, even though that's a really great person to be with. So, like, what are some ways or some steps that people can move towards to start feeling safe?
So I say accident survival mode happens in three phases. First is self-awareness. We can't change what we can't see. And I think I often liken self-awareness to a lighthouse. So for those who don't know, the lighthouse is this tall structure with a light on top on the coast. And it shines, it rotates like every 30 seconds if there is a rotation. It's a very bright light that shines onto the sea so that boats that are coming in at night can see their way to shore. So having self-awareness, it illuminates your path, what's in front of you, what's to the side of you, what's behind you. And it gives you the opportunity to adjust your path so that you don't end up shipwrecked, you don't end up in more chaos. So self-awareness is first. The second step or phase is reprogramming. Oftentimes, the reason why we end up in survival mode for so long is because of the narratives that we carry for a very long time. Most of us recycle 95% of our thoughts. So the reprogram is introducing new thoughts, new patterns, challenging our beliefs and our narratives, and giving us an opportunity to have a clean slate, which then allows us to put down the chaos, right? Because now we recognize that that's no longer needed. And then the third phase, in my opinion, is a reinvention in this space, in the trauma space, hear a lot of people say, work through your trauma so you can go back to who you were before it happened. And I think that's absolutely rubbish, right? And the reason why I say that, if you drop black paint in white paint, I don't care how pale it is no longer white, it's gray. When you experience trauma, trauma changes you. And we now know that trauma changes us at a DNA level. So there is no way for me, especially after compounded trauma over a period of nearly 20 years, for me to go back to who I was at 7 years old. Because I've learned lessons that have changed me. I have gotten to know myself that has changed me. I have gotten to know the truth about my environment, which has changed me. So reinvention is perhaps picking up the positive pieces of the person you were before the trauma, but really stepping into the lessons that you learned, stepping into the edification you picked up as a result of those lessons, and really deciding who you are. And a lot of times, we as traumatized people, one of the biggest things that I see is, well, I don't even know who I am. I don't know who I am besides being a victim of domestic abuse. I don't know who I am besides being this or that. So if we don't know who we are, how we can we go back? This is the opportunity to define once we understand how much control we actually have over our lives. So for me, that's what is needed in order to move us forward. Those fundamental steps, understanding what we need to change, changing the stories that are holding us back, and then stepping into a version of ourselves that is aligned with our values, um, and who we actually want to be. Not what the world says we should be, but what we define it to be.
Yeah. You know, how we talk to ourselves, like you're saying, the 95% of the things that we keep reinforcing. I dated a guy 10-ish years ago, and it was go back and forth, just like it was toxic, and we'd break up and we'd get back together, and it was just like so unhealthy. But I believed he was the one, and I believed I was not worthy enough for anybody else. And my friends would say to me, Steph, you deserve better. No, I don't. I did not believe that I did. Now I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't even be attracted to him. I would be like, I can do so much better because I'm in a different place. But I didn't believe I was worth anything. And I thought, I am only worthy of being treated like this. And I kept saying that over and over. There's no other guy out there. There's no good men. I don't know. Right. And I know that now. I know that's not true. But repeating that over and over is
Then
why
it becomes your reality.
I kept going back to him, even though I was like, I nearly almost failed my some of my classes at university because I was always crying and I was always like upset. So
Mhm.
it's, yeah, that's why when I see people kind of go from one relationship to the other, I've been single quite a long time, mostly in between, different things. But I used to really get upset, like, oh, everyone else is getting married, and they have boyfriends, and I'm a loser. And I'm like, no, Steph, this was always for your betterment, so you could continue to learn who you are. And yeah, it's powerful how we speak to ourselves, what we believe about ourselves.
Absolutely. It makes or breaks us, really.
And that's what you help women with when they're in survival mode is how can you start coming back to yourself, loving yourself?
Yes, absolutely. I walk them through those three phases, which I've broken down into 6 steps,
Mm.
and really just challenging the narratives, challenging the things. One of the things that I also do with my clients is also challenge these societal expectations of us, right? Like we are fed this, what I call a conveyor belt of success. You go to school, you do really good, you get a good job, and you work until you're retired, and then at that point you can live your life, and that doesn't work for everybody. And oftentimes, people are in careers because they felt family pressure, societal pressure. They're not actually living for them. So that's also what I help people to do in the reinvention stage is like determine what it is that you want for yourself. Once we get past the trauma, once you are able to work through the residual impacts that come up. I also work a lot on the survival identities that we carry as a result of what we've experienced. So perfectionism, overachieving, the martyr. There's about 10 that we pick up and we will classify that as being part of our personality. No, darling, that's a trauma response. Someone along the way taught you, like for overachieving, that what you're doing isn't enough. So because you seek validation, you do more. Someone told you in relation to uh, perfectionism that you didn't do good enough. So now you work extra hard. People pleasing. Someone was unhappy with the way that you showed up in life. So now you change the way that you show up to keep other people happy. So those are the things that I work on with my clients because those personality defects or survival identities, as I call them, are really what keep us stuck for a very long time.
Yep. Oh, I can so relate. Um, there's also when we see, like you're saying, the are you doing enough? Are you working hard enough? Kind of that hustle. Uh, I was always kind of in survival mode. I had anxiety and depression as far back as I could remember, and I did not thrive in those environments. Like I was the opposite of you, where I would just crash and burn. And so when I saw people talk, like they were the entrepreneurs and a lot of the type A personalities or whatever personalities you see, and they talk about doing this, and all I see is burnout. And so for a long time, I see these people, okay, those people, they are the ones that thrive. People like me, I guess we're just meant to suffer. And we're like, I literally thought, I guess I'm just here. I can't be like that.
Mhm.
And that's where I talk a lot about having empathy and hope, because you got to have empathy for where people have what they're going through. When they're in survival mode, you don't know. You're just like, I'm here. I don't know what I'm doing. And you can get a lot of shame. Well, you just need to do this. You just need to do that. And it's like, but wait, how can we help people help themselves? Because if they don't know, I didn't know that I could do anything within myself. I didn't know that I had power. And I did get a gut punch from a few friends. They're like, you're choosing certain things. I get mad. I'm like, it's not my fault that I went through this and that somebody did this to me. I was pissed off. um, and maybe, if I kind of like things said softer. But it happened and it was what I needed. And then I realized, wait, because as people started saying, you have power within yourself. We're powerful beings. We can start to change our own lives. I was like, what?
So
So
many people are completely oblivious to the amount of power they actually hold for
yeah.
their lives. Completely oblivious. And part of me thinks that it's systematic, but I mean, that's a whole other conversation.
Yes. Well, the systems in place, like there are, like I grew up highly religious, and so it was always like, we don't have any power. You have to ask God for it. And I would be praying always, like, help, just take this away, help me. I don't know. And then I was like, what's wrong? God doesn't, he's not listening to me. I'm doing something wrong or whatever. And then getting out of that, and people are like, no, you can change your own life. I was like, oh, so I don't just sit where I'm praying about it?
Mhm.
Oh, I didn't know that.
But see, faith is key. But it even says in the Bible, you gotta help yourself. You
Yeah,
gotta help
it's
yourself.
it's like
Any
yes and.
change, yes, any change requires action. Like, and a lot of times, I can have a whole conversation about religion with you as well. But a
Probably.
lot of times, we are misinformed. And so that's where a lot of church hurt comes into as well, because we are fed these half truths, and that basically that those half truths are there to control. But we're fed a lot of half truths. If they say pray and do, I mean, I think you would have probably been in a much better situation. It was praying and trusting that if I take this step, I'll be supported by my higher power. But they don't tell you that, because they want to keep you in this rut almost, so that you are depending on the institution rather than the relationship. And I could preach about this, okay? But
Yes.
we're not gonna go there today.
Well, and oh, there was something you just said and I lost it. Oh man. This happens sometimes.
Happens to me all the time.
I'm sure I did hear that at times as well.
Hmm.
But it was always like, I was so scared because they said do not do it in your own strength. And it was always confusing to me as well. But yeah, different people say different things. But also, I've had to hear different language, different
Hmm.
wordings. So getting out, hearing things outside of the church was like, oh, is that what they were trying to tell us? Because I kept just hearing the same wording all over, right? Um, and oh, I know what I was going to say. Also, if there's not an understanding of how the body works and how the brain, like trauma, how it affects the brain and psychology, learning more about psychology, learning more about personal growth and all these different things has helped me spiritually as well. Whereas certain spiritual places, they don't want anything to do with that. And I'm like, well, that person literally has PTSD. That person has been through trauma. That is a thing. Their body is reacting, their brain is changed by it. You have to acknowledge that. You can't just say, well, pray it away. And I've seen that a lot. So that
Hmm.
really bothers me because
Hmm.
people are crying out for help and they're going to their pastors. And
Who
I'm
aren't
like,
trauma informed.
who aren't trauma informed, who don't have that background. And so it can be like, yes, go talk to your pastor and go see it. somebody who can help.
Therapist, something. But
Yeah.
and that brings up another point, right? There are a lot of people in this world who are trying to help. Like we won't
Mhm.
remove the intention, but if you aren't aware of how trauma shows up, if you don't understand the residual impact of trauma, you don't know understand how long it can live in our bodies, you're not really helping, right? Like I went to therapy for years and years and years. But what I learned, because part of my therapy was um, required after a suicide attempt, right? Like I had to go to therapy because of that. I learned how to show up in that space just to tick the box. I learned how I didn't get deep enough to get help. I just talked because I knew it was required. And oftentimes we re-traumatize ourselves in these spaces because we are going to people who can't really support us. And it's not against them because therapists have a very narrow lane that from which they can operate, right? Because of their regulations and stuff like that. But I am a person who truly believes that every single person who interacts with traumatized people should be trauma informed. It should be a requirement to be trauma informed because if you aren't, you can potentially do more harm than good.
Yeah, that's fabulous. This has been so much fun chatting with you, Letitia, and hearing your story and hearing your wisdom. What's the best way somebody can reach out to you? Is it on your website?
Um, Between my website or LinkedIn, LinkedIn is my primary platform. Leticia R. France is there, or my website, leticiarenefrancis.com.
Perfect. I'll put all that information in the show notes. Um, and I was just wondering if there's any words of wisdom or anything you'd like to leave the listeners with. What would that be?
I'm going to leave your listeners with the same message that I leave my listeners. You were not born to break, but you damn sure were not born to just survive. Disrupt the cycle, reclaim your life, and thrive on your own terms.
Beautiful. I love that so much. Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much, Letitia. I really appreciate it. And I'm so glad to meet you and have this chat with you. You're wonderful to interact with. And like, I said you and I were both saying before we recorded, like, oh, I
Yeah,
think
we
this will
had
be
a good
fine.
giggle, guys, before we recorded.
Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you guys for listening. Sending love to you all. Bye.